Hey guys, we're back tonight. We got the crankshaft put together last night. Well, not really put it together, but we put the rod bearings on it, attached the connecting rods. And I thought I would show you what, so when you buy a set of Porsche 912 main bearings, it comes in a box like this. They are minus 0.025 on the crankshaft side, which is 10,000ths of an inch. They come in little boxes like this. I guess when you spend that much, they want to make you feel special, so they are good and wrapped up. And this is the front one that goes in the front case. The rear main with the thrust surface, it's not all hogged up. And the other box has the all the halves for the split bearings. I've cheated a little bit and already took some of them out, at least half of it, and put it in the block. So what we're going to do is going to put them in the other half of the block, and we're going to put it together and torque it, and then we were going to measure with a dial bore gauge the diameter of those when it's torqued together, and then compare it to our crank diameters and make sure that our oil clearances are proper. We're going to try it that way. We'll see how that turns out. So let me get set up with that and I'll bring you back. Alright guys, we're back. So we're going to try something a little different this time. We are going to, got our crankshaft over here. We put the rods on it last night. We checked our diameters of our number 2 and 3. Well, we checked all the main bearings. So anyway, we checked all them, verified they're good, and came up with a number at 2, so that's 2.155. So now that we know that, I have taken our block and put it together. I put the center bolts in it and torqued it together after I put the bearing inserts in it. We will show that in more detail when we actually install the engine. But what I have is a dial bore gauge. This thing is spring loaded here, and as the bore gets smaller, it moves the dial indicator. So I actually purchased this a long time ago in anticipation of doing my truck engine. This came first. So, and again, I am no engine builder. I can work a day job like everybody else. And obviously, from the way we took this thing apart, I was no engine builder 30 years ago either. So anyway, before I digress, I took the micrometer that we just saw, and I set this to 0. So with a micrometer at 2.155 inches, it is that distance right there. That'll bring the needle to 0. So from what I've understood, you put this in, you squeeze that up into position. I hope you can see that. Let me get you flipped over, make sure. So 0 is right there. Got this in the bore, and you want to go to the smallest point. And roll it around. So we're about 0.004 inches. Would you agree with that? Come out here to the number 3 main. We'll do the same thing. So when we come back to 0, we should be zero straight up, in case it won't focus. It should be the same diameter as our crankshaft. So I'm going to say that's like 4/1000 of an inch, if I'm doing this right, which I'm sort of assuming I am. So somewhere in here I saw oil clearances. It has oil clearances for, let's find it. Here we go. Camshaft, connecting rods. So main bearing clearances, it wants 0.0031, that's for number 1. Let's look at 2. But 0018, 0039, well, I'd say we're at 004, so we are like on the wide side of that. The other ones, they are what they are because they're round bearings. So anyway, at least we're close, and my measuring techniques may kind of not be right anyway. So we are going to pull this back apart, do some further cleaning, and we will work on setting up this crankshaft and installing it. Alright guys, so one more little project for tonight. I don't know if you remember when we took this apart. So this is one half of the engine case, the passenger side case. The oil pickup tube comes through here and goes into the sump. This is the sump, which has a screen and a gasket, and it lines up here. So, and then the oil pump is in the third piece of the case that's up in the front of the engine. So I kind of remember this being a problem way back, but this tube's like really loose in the case. So my thought process is that if it doesn't have a good seal back here in the case, I don't know how well it's going to provide oil pressure. Or the suction can suck in air instead of oil. It wants to suck oil through this tube, but if it's open right there and there's a gap, it's probably a lot easier to suck air in through there. All right, so right here is where my audio apparently died. So what I'm showing you is where the oil pickup goes around. There's a magnet in this piece of the sump, and there's a screen that goes on here, and this is where the oil pickup fits inside that magnet, and that's where the oil gets picked up. So that tube was kind of floating in there before, which conceivably it could pull air in around the case rather than suck up oil out of the bottom of the sump. So what we're going to do is we're going to get a punch and try to, this just fits through a hole in the front of the case. We're going to take a punch here, and we're going to kind of knock around where that tube goes through the hole and try to tighten that up, kind of pin that thing down. And so I beat on it a little bit with this punch and then realized that I need a longer punch. So I go ahead and grab a longer punch and knock the whole thing in, and in the end it looks pretty tight. So there should be some sort of improvement. Okay, it's the next day. I have checked these bearing clearances a million times with the dial bore gauge, and I'm getting like 0.004 of an inch, which is like right on the edge of being the wrong size. But I mean, the crank measures spot on, and the bearings are the correct bearings, so we're going to move forward. The make sure you can see what I'm looking at. So we're going to lay the crank in, and I got some plastic gauge, and we will plastic gauge it and check it that way. So here is the main bearing. Looks much better than the one we took out. That's the thrust side that goes in. This side has little dimples for oil to drain back. Also has this very important feature right here, a dowel pin hole, which is what this is. So that needs to be in there. If not, if it's not dropped in like that, and you go to torque the case down, it's like that. It puts a big dent like the one we took out.
So one thing I'm sure I didn't do back in the 80s was take this thing and I'm going to mark where it needs to be, because this thing is going to have to be slipped on the crankshaft first. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take a little assembly lube, squeeze a little bit of that in there. I'm going to go ahead and slide it on the on the crankshaft over here on the bench. Now we will bring, let me see, so I'm going to carry it over here by the rods that will be up, which will be number 1 and number 2. Yes. There. I just got it. Like so. And it'll drop down in. And it'll line that mark up. I should be able to feel it drop in there. Okay. So now that that is dropped in, I am going to cut 2 little strips of plastic gauge. I'll bring it over here. Actually, you know what? I'm going to use the red because it's 2 to 6. It's more in our range, what I believe the range to be. So this stuff is a little bitty strand of precise plastic. So I'm going to cut it. Come on. There. Cut another piece for the other one. We will take this over and set it right down in there on top of the crank for the number 2. So this is about the time my audio died. So we got the plastic gauge laid on the number 2 and the number 3 main journals. We're going to set the other half of the engine case down on there. You have to kind of juggle the connecting rods, keep them upright, and drop it on down. And then we will tap it a little bit with the hammer to get it kind of seated, making sure that our number 1 main there with the mark on it is still lined up. So we're going to help it down a little bit, and then we will, there's a center bolt that goes through the case here, and we will put that, tap it down, then we'll put that center bolt on, and we will torque this thing down without rotating the crankshaft, and then we'll pull it back off and see what our plastic gauge looks like. Alright, so in this one I've pulled it back apart, and we're going to go in with the plastic gauge reader. It has marks on the side of the package. I'll bring you in here a little bit, and you can see the sort of red smear mark right there. So we'll line it up with what's on the little envelope the stuff comes in. So wish my audio didn't crap out here, but I'm going to light it up some more. The lines, that's even worse, you can't see that. So looks like it's lining up with the 2000s. So being as small as it is, it's going to 2000s clearance is going to squish out more. So that's what it lined up with. So now we are happy with our main bearing clearance. So I think we are good to go on all that. Let's see what this one says. This one is, once again, it's between 2 and 3. I know you can't see it in this clip. So maybe I just don't know how to read a dowel bore gauge, but we're going to go with the plastic gauge. We're going to trust that on this this portion of the build.
Okay, so I wrestled on this rod journal a little bit and used green this time. I expected the clearance to be a little smaller. So on the inch side, I'm going to say we're matched up to about 15 thousandths. See what that is millimeter wise. Millimeter wise, it's about 0.38. So, whoa. These specs are, this might be easier. Let me get out. The specs are 16 thousandths, 36 thousandths, 0.04 millimeters. So we're good. I'm just going to check that one. They all measured the same. So now I will clean this off and put some assembly lube on these rods. I already did the bottom two rods, number 3 and number 4. I already put assembly lube when they were on the bench, but I am going to retorque them because I found conflicting torque measurements. I found 22.5 and I found 32.5, and I searched the internet, which knows everything, and it said 32.5. So we're going to double check them. So let me get ready to do that. Okay, so I got all the rod bearings torqued. You can go ahead and lay this crankshaft in here using some Lubra plate assembly lube. I already lubed the number 1 main because it's on the crankshaft itself. So, I'm sure that'll all squeeze out as soon as we drop the crank in there. So here goes. Let's see, so that would make sure I pick it up by the right rods. And make sure this dowel pin's lined up correctly.
So we lost the audio yet again. We have the crankshaft laid in the block. We have the dowel pin for the number 1 main lined up properly. Line up the Sharpie marks I made earlier, because that's one thing you definitely don't want to mess up, which apparently I did before based on the double dowel pin marks and the old crank. So now we'll line up the rods and put some assembly lube on everything, and we'll glue up the case, and then we'll get ready to put the other half of the case together.
Okay, so got our lifters. I was getting confused, so I wanted to get some started. I'll put a little assembly lube on there. I mean, you could probably use motor oil. Not that it matters, but while I have it.
Alright, so in this scene we are installing the bottom half of the case, put some assembly lube on the lifters, and we're going to go ahead and drop the lifters into the engine case. And I tried to keep them in order the entire time this thing was apart on the bench. I cleaned them real well with parts washer and brake cleaner and blew them out. So now they're all in there. Put some on the face of the lifters, some in the cam bearings, because this engine does not have replaceable cam bearings. The cam bearings are actually made into the case. So we will get that propped up, and the block makes a convenient place to rest your assembly lube. And then pretty sure I'm going to line up our cam. There's a mark on the crankshaft and 2 marks on the camshaft that have to kind of straddle each other. Right, where is it? Right there. There's one line on the camshaft gear, and there are 2 marks on the crankshaft gear. So you kind of have to work around and roll them into position so they end up straddling each other. So that drops into place, and then we'll move on to there you can see it. It's good to go. We will move on to putting the rest of the engine case together.